Ted Cruz wanted to lecture judges. Sheldon Whitehouse reminded him who's actually breaking the law.
With respect to let me just summarize the administrative office of the court's order, because some of the things that the chairman have said are not quite accurate. First of all, it was standard operating procedure not to disclose the names associated with toll records when the toll records were sought by the government. Under DOJ's both Democrat and Republican, in fact, it was the Trump 1 DOJ that did this with respect to House members. And it was the Biden DOJ that fixed this problem to require that the disclosure now be made. And the suggestion that the basis for the need for a non-disclosure order would be the conduct of the recipient, of the person whose toll records were obtained, has been fairly well rebutted by Jack Smith in his sworn testimony in the House, where he pointed out that the basis for that order was the pattern and practice of Trump associates putting improper pressure to bear to intimidate witnesses over and over and over again. The fault lay in the conspiracy, not in the subjects of the toll records request. Professor Vladeck, we've talked, I think there's a pretty good fault line here between adjudicative decisions, whose remedy is appeal, and personal or administrative misconduct that traditionally forms the basis for an impeachment. On which side of that line would the failure to declare or pay personal income taxes fall?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly on the personal off-the-bench side of that, Senator.
Yeah, that would be personal misconduct of the kind that impeachment would likely cover. And we still don't know the answers to those questions, which to me is quite surprising. Is it not also true that regular citizens have been prosecuted and convicted for failing to report income and pay associated taxes?
Fairly regularly, to my understanding, Senator.
Yeah. And if we look at this question of threats, which is the context for a great deal of what we're hearing today, it appears to me, and it appears to judges who've spoken out to this effect, that there is a pattern of threat, an unprecedented pattern of threat that has arisen during this administration with, as you point out, judges who've been appointed by all presidents who have surviving appointees. And it's not just the threat that's part of it. It's also what the judges are saying about the Department of Justice and its lawyers. So back to the MAGA DOJ, just summarizing some of the words that have been used about their arguments and behavior in court: disingenuous arguments 5 times, bad faith arguments 5 times, unprecedented behavior including, quote, concerted effort by the executive to smear and impugn individual judges who rule against it, being both unprecedented and unfortunate. That's a Trump appointee speaking about this administration's behavior. Shoddy work 3 times. DOJ losing credibility or being disrespectful, having lied. Willful and intentional noncompliance with orders. Pretexts being offered. Unconscionable arguments. Nonsensical arguments. In that environment, what then comes into play is, I'll let you pick it up from here. How many senior people in the administration have made threats against judges, both generally and specifically, from the president on down, when they make a decision disagreeing with them?
I mean, the number I can think of is 5, Senator, but that's, there's probably more. That's just what has been widely reported. And I think, it's worth stressing that the point, including the president, and it's worth stressing that the point is Stephen Miller, the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, the then Chief of Staff of the Justice Department, Chad Mizell. And I think it's worth stressing that the point here is not that it is never appropriate for the executive branch to raise concerns about federal judges. The point is that there are processes for those concerns. And so I'm just struck that here we are, more than an hour into the hearing, and this is going to be the first mention of the Judicial Conduct and Disability Act of 1980, which Congress passed largely to recognize the fact that it was a impossible choice to have nothing or impeachment as the options for judges misbehaving. There is a JC&D process. If there were actually serious charges to be brought against these judges, that would be the avenue. It hasn't been utilized except for the frivolous complaints against Chief Judge Boasberg.
Precisely. And I would argue that the context here is a pattern of threats against federal judges for unprecedentedly bad behavior by DOJ. When they call it out, they then have the cascade of threats fall in on them, and that it's a deliberate effort to try to intimidate the judiciary into not ruling against the Trump administration, no matter how defective the position that they take. And it's hard for me not to see this proceeding as supportive of that unfortunate effort.
This hearing was supposed to be about holding judges accountable. What it actually turned into was Sheldon Whitehouse exposing how far the GOP is willing to go to intimidate the judiciary when they don't like the rulings. Ted Cruz and Republicans walked in pretending they were champions of ethics and transparency. But Whitehouse did what he always does. He brought facts, history, and receipts, and calmly dismantled the entire premise. First, Whitehouse shut down the misleading narrative about phone and toll records. Republicans tried to imply judges and members of Congress were somehow protected or favored. Whitehouse reminded them, no, this was standard DOJ procedure under both parties, including under Trump's own Justice Department. And when the problem was identified, it was the Biden DOJ that fixed it. That's not corruption, that's governance. Then came the key pivot. Whitehouse drew a clear, uncomfortable line the GOP didn't want to cross. There's a difference between judicial decisions you don't like, which you appeal, and personal misconduct, which is handled through impeachment or formal judicial review. Republicans keep blurring that line on purpose. Why? Because they're not actually interested in ethics. They're angry about rulings that block Trump. And this is where Whitehouse landed the punch. He pointed out that ordinary Americans are prosecuted all the time for failing to report income or pay taxes. If a judge did that, it would absolutely fall under personal misconduct. The problem? Republicans keep alleging misconduct, but they never seem interested in proving it through the actual legal process Congress created. Instead, they hold hearings like this one. Then Whitehouse widened the lens, and this is where Ted Cruz had no answer. Whitehouse laid out an unprecedented pattern of threats against judges during the Trump era, not just from online extremists, but from the highest levels of government, the president's senior DOJ officials. White House operatives, all attacking judges by name for ruling into ruling intent again. Even Trump-appointed judges have called it out, describing DOJ arguments as disingenuous, bad faith, unconscionable, and shoddy. Let that sink in. Judges appointed by Republicans warning that the Justice Department under Trump was losing credibility in court. So when Republicans now pretend this is about accountability, White House made it crystal clear this is about pressure. This is about fear. This is about sending a message to judges, rule our way or else. And then came the quiet killer point. Congress already created a system for judicial misconduct back in 1980, the Judicial Conduct and Disability Act. If Republicans had real evidence, that's where it would go, but they don't use it. Instead, they file frivolous complaints, hold performative hearings, and amplify threats. All while claiming they're defending the Constitution. White House didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand. He didn't need to. He simply exposed the truth. This hearing wasn't about justice. It was about weaponizing outrage to protect Trump and bully the courts. And that's why moments like this matter. Because while Republicans talk about law and order, Democrats like Sheldon Whitehouse are defending the one thing that keeps democracy intact, an independent judiciary that doesn't bend to political threats. Ted Cruz wanted a spectacle. Sheldon Whitehouse delivered a warning. And if Americans were paying attention, they heard it loud and clear.